We'll start out with some quick intros. I know all of you sent me your bios, but I did not memorize all three of your bios. But I do have a good knowledge of what everyone's done. So you saw, Liz's some of Liz's films, and obviously nominated for Independent Spirit Awards, and worked with the Duplass brothers, and just had a ton of films that she's done over the years, really high level, nominated for a lot of awards. And Elayne is an amazing producer who's been in the industry. We don't want to say for how long, but she started her career working with Michael Mann on Miami Vice, the TV series in the 1980s, and has worked on Oscar-nominated films like Ali, Oscar-winning films like Moonlight, The Florida Project, a wide variety of films over the years. And Melissa, the youngster in the group, has been still done 15 films in the last 8 years, and has worked at a really high level. It's in DGA as a UPM, and has established herself as a great producer already over the years. And we're really excited, when we put this workshop together of, how do you find the right producer for your project? We started with Liz, and then it turned out we were going to have Elayne and Melissa in town at the same time, because we've been location scouting with them for the last couple of days to possibly bring a film or two to the area that they've got in the works. So it worked out perfect to have the two of them join the panel here. So one of the things, question that I always get is, when I introduce myself as a film commissioner, no one knows what that is, and you have to kind of explain what that is. And I've been a producer for many years as well, and it's the same thing with a producer. You say you're a producer, people know what the word is, but they really don't have any idea what it means or what people do. And we really do have three different types of producers on the panel right now who've done very different things over the years. So let's start out first by just saying, as a producer, kind of, what do you do? Liz, we'll start with you.
So I am a creative producer, and I've worked in the independent film space. So there's a little differentiation when you're talking about independent film versus like more studio type pictures. And so, when you're working in smaller budgets, smaller films, a lot of times those things bleed together, such as being a creative producer versus like a line producer. And we were joking earlier that as a producer, you basically just do everything. You do everything from A to Z to get a movie off the ground, on the screen, and out into the world. But I remember having a conversation with one of the producers that I worked with and worked under, Toby Halbrooks, who's one of David Lowery's producers. And he was like saying, you really need to think about what you want to do if you want to be a creative producer or a line producer, because those are two different kind of tracks. And so, line producers typically, and you can elaborate on that, but, are really overseeing the budget specifically and hiring crew and doing a lot of logistics. Creative producing, in a lot of cases, you're starting off early on in the project with the writer-director. In some cases, you've got material that you have and you hire directors or writers to do an adaptation. And so it's creatively overseeing the project from the beginning to the end, whereas a line producer is kind of hired prior to the production, and then oversees the production, and then the creative producer usually stays on board to the end of the film. But again, in the independent film space, I've kind of done both.
I agree with everything Liz just said. As far as a producer, you're pretty much responsible for the entire film from beginning to end. There is a difference. The creative producer will stay on from early inception to not only dealing with the script, you're casting, you're dealing with the writers, and you stay on through post, whereas I am more of a line producer. I negotiate the union contracts, I hire the crew. There's in budgets for film, there's something that's above the line and below the line. The above the line people are the actors, the directors, the producers, all the creatives are above the line. Below the line are all the workers, all the people, production managers, gaffers, all the working crew. And a line producer kind of walks that line between above and below. And that's the only way I know how to really explain it. Everything goes through you that has to do any financial impact, but it's also we're responsible for the scheduling to make sure we can make this movie. It's doable. We can do it within this amount of period of time. We create the budget ahead of time. and which is a living, breathing document until you actually start shooting. Your budget can change, you know, many times a day, as you're making deals, as you're moving forward. But, and I've worked both studio and independent films. In studios, a line producer's job is very much the same, but it's a little more political. You're dealing with the studios all the time and they have their precedences that you can't cross, so you can't negotiate your own union contracts, you can't solve a lot of your own problems. Whereas up until, I'd say about a dozen years ago when I started really doing independent filmmaking, it was a lot more, for me, a lot more rewarding because I can solve our own problems, that I can negotiate something that I'm not negotiating on behalf of 30 other movies, So there's more creative freedom for what I do. Not that it's really called a creative job, but in a way it is, because you're juggling personalities and egos and making sure they all fit together with the above the line and, the below. So that's.
I was just saying, speak a little closer to the microphone.
Oh.
You have to repeat it. Yeah, I'd say, as a production manager and, working with Elayne as my line producer, it really is towing that line. I find myself to be everyone's best friend and enemy because our budgets are a living, breathing document. There's a finite amount of money and not everybody can have all the toys and all the crew that they want. So it's working creatively with our creatives, working with the crew, and how we're able to, make these films within the dynamics that we have to, because, unfortunately, people just at independent films aren't just throwing money at them, just because it could be a beautiful script that doesn't matter to them. It's what's gonna make them money. So we have to fit into that. So.
And so Liz, speaking of money, that is always the most challenging part of any project, right? Is finding the money for it. And I know a lot of people think, especially if you're a writer or director, you have ideas, you're like, I just need to find a good producer. They will get me the money I need, and magically all will be well in the world, and my project will happen. You talk a little bit about the realities of finding money and what you do. Do you go out and find money? Is that part of what you're doing, or are you working with other producers who are really finding the money and then you're more creative folks? Talk a little bit about that process of finding the money.
And I would love to first clarify that, when we talk about independent film, that's anything that's not made by a studio. So an independent film could be, and it could be a feature, it could be like $50,000, it could be $20 million. Obviously, there's a huge difference between the two. And so what I've primarily done is like the lower budget film space, working up slowly, but I had a journalism background, so I am, I guess, driven by like real stories, diverse stories. And obviously coming from Dallas, Texas, it's a regional market. So my thing is, again, there's a huge difference between bigger budget and smaller. And so for me, it's been a combination of things in terms of finding money. It started off, a group of us filmmaker friends making movies together, where you're scrounging together some monies, doing crowdfunding campaigns, submitting to programs and getting grants and those types of things. And then as you go forward, it can be shorts or features, you start making more connections, meeting more people. So then as that's happened, then you start, and making connections for potential investors, and, production companies that would want to finance your film. So to me, it's like one small step at a time, whereas you're always keeping in mind, who are the people who are the connections you have. So again, my answer comes from this independent, smaller budget film space is, what movie are you making and why are you making it? And so therefore what you're trying to do is think outside the box. I mean, you might be thinking about like, oh, what relatives do I have that are attorneys or dentists that can give you some money? But you're also thinking about allies and advocates. And so often in the independent film space, there's a reason why you're telling this story. So what you want to do is try to think about who would want to support that story. Does it have some sort of social impact or social relevance? Is it about a subject matter that, oh, well, this organization, these people would be interested in that? And then, I was producing, low budget in Hollywood terms, but like around a $3 million movie, and it was a Persian film. So I was actually pitching to, Persian businessmen who had a real passion for telling this type of story. So it's always just about finding the angle and thinking outside the box, in addition to anybody in your wheelhouse who would want to support you as a filmmaker. And then just, again, along the way, going to film festivals, meeting people. Now you start making connections, and then that broadens up your scope of more, I guess you'd say, like Hollywood money, if that makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting too, because with any film project, there's no one way to get something done. Like every project you do is completely different. There's always different ways to do it. Maybe
Yes.
we should rewind a little bit as well, and kind of how did everyone get started? You mentioned you started off as a journalist, and then sort of progressed the industry there. So we'll kick to Elayne, and then we'll come back around to you, Liz, on how you got started. But Elayne, obviously I mentioned you started on Miami Vice with Michael Mann in the 1980s. So talk a little bit about how your career got started, and then how you transitioned into the different phases of being a producer throughout the years.
Part of it, which is very, very real, is luck. I happened to be in the right. What am I doing? I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I was hired to drive somebody around for a couple of days, a creative consultant for Miami Vice before it started shooting. And I, through that, met producers, met people. I had no idea who anybody was, so I was very comfortable. I thought it was all very social. And at one point, everyone in the producer's office got ill. And they called me up and asked if I would come in and cover the office. And I said yes. I'd never been in a production office. And, but it's really what shows through, and what I've learned and what I look for is your work ethic. Because that's what it really takes. It's the passion, it's the drive, but it's your work ethic. It's especially when you're starting out and you're dealing with people like Michael Mann, you don't say, oh, it's 9 o'clock, I'm here 12 hours, can I go home? You don't say no until we were on one job, they wanted me to find a boa constrictor at 2 o'clock in the morning to put in a washing machine. And before I could say no, I had to wake up everyone I knew, and and it's that kind of thing. You have to really put your nose to the grind and keep going. I was lucky. I was taught that whoever's making the copies of the script and distributing it is just as important as everyone else, because you can't make a movie without either. Which sounds easy, but Michael Mann would come into town with these bar napkins, it was before computers, handwritten notes, and I'd be cutting and pasting and trying to get them to the set by 6 o'clock in the morning before they started shooting, and not knowing at the time it was going to become a huge hit. And it was, and I was very lucky to be part of that and ride with it. But I only stayed with the show for about a year. I got married afterwards, and I ended up doing a lot of Michael's and John Nicolello, the other producers, their side work. So not doing Miami Vice anymore, but I was doing a miniseries in Spain with Michael. And I still didn't see myself as becoming a producer or staying in the film business. I would have become a lot better friend with a lot of the stars I worked with had I ever knew that I'd be a producer. But it was the adrenaline and being part of that group and that part of that creative process and just watching it. And it's just this energy that you find. And I imagine most of you here who want to be filmmakers have that. That passion, that drive, that energy, that, you can work 18 hours if you have to, or whatever it takes. And even now, I choose not to work 18-hour days, but there are times where you've got to do whatever it takes. And I just went from one project to the next. I did a lot of television series in the 90s, and that was interesting and fun. But I really love doing feature films. And it took a lot of years before I was able to say, this is where I want to head. For many years, it's about working. And as long as you're working, you're growing, you're moving, you're meeting. I tell people all the time how to start out. If you're sitting home doing nothing and there's a movie going on, call the office and volunteer to be an intern for a couple of days. Get out there. Just energy breeds energy. And I mean, I could tell you several people that I've hired that did that to me, that showed up on moving day to help move furniture into the office, that you just fall in love with them, and the next thing you know, they're part of your team. And it's that kind of being open and willing to do whatever it takes to make it done, and to also know when you can't, when it's time to change, lanes. When I decided to go into independent filmmaking, for what I do as a line producer, I'm much closer to directors and the creative producers, and I get much more hands-on, which is what I chose to do, and that's the direction I wanted to get in. Not that I ever wanted to be a creative producer, I don't, but I wanted to be part of that process. I wanted to, to me, it doesn't matter if it's blue or green, it's how much it costs. But at the same time, you want the movie to be the best it can be. So it's a collaboration of so many people and so many brilliant ideas and writers, and everybody from the production assistant on to the director of photography are integral parts of production. And I think that's something that I learned a lot from my Miami Vice experience with the producer John Nicolella. He was called Captain Chaos, and he was a bit of a wild man, but he took really good care of his people, and he told the truth, which is not something you hear very often. If he fired someone, he told them why. And I love that. I love the fact that you can be that honest and still do what you have to do and make the changes you have to make, because it's really not for everybody. There are many people, I've had so many interns who start out thinking they want to be filmmakers, they want to dedicate their life to this. And after a couple of films, it's not their space, it's not their energy, it's not where they belong. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a great experience, it's just it kind of weeds you out. Because if you want to be a filmmaker, you have to want it more than anything else pretty much in your world. You have to be willing to give whatever it takes, whether it's 7 days a week, whether it's missing your child's school play. It's painful what you have, the dues you have to pay. But I don't know how to do anything else. So it's just love. Every time I say I'm not going to work for a while, then the phone rings and you start getting all the adrenaline. And like, oh yeah, we can do this, and it starts falling together. One of the things about funding is to point out on the producer level, there's also the executive producers. And they are ultimately the people who are either investing or raising the money. But as a producer, a line producer, when you're trying to get an independent project off the ground, you are going to any area or film fund you've heard of, or presenting yourself somewhere. You start out going to people like your dentist, but they'll only finance one movie. They're not going So you always have to think about also what's your next film. You don't want to burn bridges on any one project and use up all your resources on any one project, because hopefully it's going to be 2, 3, and you're going to keep growing and networking and meeting more people, and it just takes on a life of its own in many ways.
Well, Melissa, maybe you could answer the question why dentists seem to be so wealthy and everyone says that they're the ones to go after for funding. Or you can skip that and just tell us how you.
I take care of my teeth, so my dentist doesn't make much off me. No, I got into the industry, since I was a little kid. I always wanted to make movies. I think the only positions I knew of were director and actor. So I thought I wanted to be an actor. Realized I didn't, I didn't like going to auditions and things like that as like a kid. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So after I graduated college, I reached out to a few of the local producers that I knew, asked if they had any paying jobs. And because they were, small independent films, they didn't have those, but they had an internship. So I met a local producer in Florida who was actually is a producing partner of Elayne's. And I interned with her for about a year. I was working at Starbucks, waking up at 4 a.m, would work 8-hour shifts, go work for her. But, in the first 6 months of working with her. I released one of her films into 12 theaters across the United States. I had to secure advertising and worked with local schools because it was kind of like a college type film. And it just taught me a lot. And that's kind of when I realized working with her and all the, and that was just the post-production aspect of producing that I wanted to myself get into producing. And then I started getting paying jobs as an assistant to the producers. I did a lot of accounting clerking, which I highly recommend because I was seeing the numbers kind of rolling in. I was privy to a lot of information. You know, your average set PA isn't going to get a lot of your average like department heads and things like that. I'm seeing budget numbers and just privy to a lot of information, a lot of conversations I'm able to listen to, and just kept going, kind of taking any job I could get. And I was fortunate enough to start working with Elayne and learn from her, just digested everything that she had to say. And a few years ago, she gave me my first opportunity to production supervise a Hallmark film that she was producing. And that's kind of where it started rolling for me once I didn't mess up too bad and was able to actually do the job. And just kind of kept going from there, doing more projects. I was fortunate enough to do some smaller DGA projects, and through that was able to get my DGA card last year and produce my first small Hallmark film last year. But it was just, I took whatever I could get. I listened, you know, even when I probably shouldn't have been listening. But I just tried to absorb everything that I could and said, yes, you know, I got an opportunity to go to Bulgaria. Yes. Want to do this movie in California? You have to pay your way to get there. Yes. You know, same thing for a movie in Oklahoma. I just took anything that I could do to just learn.
Awesome. And I think that's probably really valuable information that, you know, the three of you have all said is really just, you got to take your opportunities and run with it, be willing to work for, nobody wants to work for free, but if you're just starting, a lot of times, you know, that's what happens. So Liz, you started as a journalist with the Dallas Morning News. So did you go to journalism school originally, and then you were going to be the next Woodward and Bernstein, and ended up a producer? How did that work out for you?
I would just say real quickly that like my family was always very supportive of the arts, but it wasn't something that I was thinking about as a career. And so then I always wanted to be an actress. And so then I ended up getting a degree in broadcast journalism in college, thinking that that would kind of combine a love of performance and being in front of the camera with an actual career. And I love writing and meeting people. And so then I ended up wanting to stay in Dallas and not go to like a small, tiny town. And so that's how I started working with the Dallas Morning News. And as I was a journalist, I was going on auditions. And that's when I started, like, I got an agent and taking acting lessons and so forth. And then over time, I was like, I don't really want to be a reporter. I love writing and meeting people. So I stopped reporting and then started writing screenplays. Still was kind of, pursuing acting. And my ex, who I'm still good friends with, he wanted to make a film. And so we made a horror film. I was just an actress in it. But I started going to all the meetings. And this is like an indie, low budget film. The lead actor was on that TV show Friday Night Lights. And so then I was just like, oh, I can get this. I can do that, And so over the course of the production, they were like, you should get a producer credit. And kind of like what you were saying, I knew I loved acting and writing, but I had no idea what a producer was and never even thought about that. But I loved the empowering feeling that it gave me instead of hoping somebody would cast me or buy my script. And so then that kind of gave me that bug, and I realized that my skill set as a journalist or reporter really translated to producing. I still have the creative passions of the writing and acting, and I've directed too, but I'm just a proactive person, so I would much rather be on a set than anywhere, and I'd rather help make movies get made than not. And so then when we sold that film, that horror film, and this is like Blockbuster days, so it was a DVD movie. And so the distributor that we had out in Los Angeles was at a big company, and then she was leaving and starting a smaller company focused on family and kids films. And we had a good working relationship with her. And so we were talking about working together again, and she said, films with dogs do really well. And I was like, oh, I wrote a script, and or I've done that too. Yeah, but I literally like was a sucker for dog movies. I love them, and I just wrote a screenplay with a dog for fun. And so I sent her that script, and she was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I ended up making a series of family kids films, and from A to Z. Like my ex, directed them. We co-wrote them. I produced them. I acted in them. I was the dog wrangler. I edited them. I went to foreign markets with our distributor, and we were doing foreign pre-sales for these films. And so I look at that as like my film school, but it was really great because a lot of times you go to make a movie and you're not sure what you're doing, whereas we had sold already to territories, Latin America, France, Germany. And so the movies had to be done on time, on budget, technically sound. And then because of my creative sensibilities, I wanted to try to make them as good as they can be. Although they're low budget talking dog movies. So it is what it is. And then we elevated to the fourth movie, being a girl and a dog. The dog wasn't talking. And then we did the horse movie. And then the scope got bigger in each one and everything. And it was really a neat experience because I learned so much, again, from A to Z. It came from an organic place. And so then around that time, the market was shifting. This is when streaming became bigger. So a lot of the bigger companies were going bankrupt that were like focused on DVD sales. So it was kind of like a thing where around the same time where I'm like, okay, I learned a lot. I don't want to keep doing laps. I want to make art. And so it wasn't, it was a situation in which on these films, it was like sweat equity, right? Like we were owning them. So now if companies are going bankrupt and not paying us, well, then it's like, okay, that doesn't make sense to do. We have to be mindful of the industry and make shifts. But then I also was like, I want to make other films. Like I still love the family kids space and I've got stuff on my plate that are bigger budget, but making low budget, talking dog films was not what I intended to do. So I sought out the filmmakers in Dallas and Austin, so in Texas, but primarily Dallas, that were making films that were playing Sundance and South by and Cannes and films that I wanted to be a part of. And so then I started friendships and collaborations and started producing short films that led to producing feature films and really finding my tribe. And, and it's like you start off small, got to be good friends with this group. And so it was like I produced their short film. When I wanted to direct something, they produced my short film. They helped me produce a short film. I helped them produce their feature. And that's where I kind of got some of this like success as far as like with Dave Lauer's A Ghost Story and Augustine Frizzell's, Never Going Back, which premiered at Sundance and were A24 films. And then the next thing in terms of this, my, I guess you'd say, career trajectory, is I wanted to expand my circle, learn and grow. So I did a producing lab in Los Angeles with Film Independent, where I was out in Los Angeles for a month. And while I was out there, I was like, I'm going to meet mentors, I'm going to meet people, but I also want to meet more people. So I like cold emailed people and said, I produced this movie, A Ghost Story. I'm here doing this producing lab. Would love to take you to coffee. And I got so many responses. People I've still stayed in touch with to this day. And going to film festivals and meeting people. So everything is kind of built that way. And then I was, the mentor that I was kind of, I guess you'd say, assigned. Like they went to people in the industry and said, here are our producing lab fellows. And they aligned us with people that would be good for us. And so it was the president of Duplass Brothers Productions that they went to Mel Eslin and said, would you be Liz's mentor? And she agreed. And I thought it was perfect because I love their films. They're also multi-hyphenates. Mark and Jay Duplass act and write and direct. Mel Eslin started off as an AD and then worked her way up to running that company. So I was like, this is amazing. And one of the things that I try to point out to people is when they talk about it being networking, it's not going to places and just handing out business cards. It's getting to know people. It's establishing friendships. So when I meet people, I try to find out who they are and what their interests are. And then you talk about a project. But if you're just pitching a film, a lot of times you get a yes or no. If I get to know someone, that's planting seeds for the future. And when I meet people and I have, let's say, a request of like, hey, can you help me with this? What can I do to support you? How can I help you? And then this turns into friendships and collaborations, which last years. And a lot of the things, like when I talk about planting seeds, things didn't come to fruition till a few years later. And so Mel was like talking to me over the years about potential projects. And, just the timing didn't work. And then she reached out to me about 7 days. And this is during COVID. And one of the things, again, with me is I made a bunch of these independent films. David Lowery was already established. This was a passion project that he was making in Dallas. And I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to learn from him with A-list actors, top department heads like production designers, costume designers, DPs, and that type of thing. And then, with, working with like Augustine and she, we made her low budget film, and then she directed the pilot of Euphoria. I was working I worked with a filmmaker in New York City. I produced a low budget feature called Materna that premiered at Tribeca, won awards. That filmmaker got a top manager in Hollywood after doing that film. So I was seeing all these people rise. And as an independent producer, there isn't a clear path as like a creative producer in the independent space. So I was kind of like, okay, I need to elevate. I need to like work on bigger films. Let me think about this. Like, let me think about next steps. COVID hit. So then when Mel reached out to me about 7 days, I was like, you know what? Right now, the only things that are getting made are micro budget or big budget. So I might as well use my unique skill set in making lower budget films to make art in this time that's dark, in this scary, scary time. So I continued this path. And again, I'm always just assessing. But it was amazing because we made 7 days in September of 2020, and we ended up winning Best First Feature at the Spirit Awards. The filmmakers on that film, thank you. The filmmakers on that film are two of my best friends now. We're talking about other projects. I made this film for Duplass Brothers, so that was a great connection. Then I ended up producing Acid Man. Alex Lehman, the director of that, I met at Sundance on the eve of his premiere of Paddleton, which was with Ray Romano and Mark Duplass. He had worked with the Duplass brothers. And so when we met at Sundance, we had that connection. We just started talking about our love of films and our lives, stayed in touch, got coffee in LA. And then he reached out to me about Acid Man. He had a big budget film that was put on pause because of COVID. And that was a personal passion project of his. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. Like, again, trying to make art in these darker times. And his big budget film got greenlit. It was Meet Cute. They shot it in New York with Kaylee Kyoko and Pete Davidson. It was a romantic comedy that was like, $10 million movie. And so we're talking about working together in the future. And he's also said, you help me make my personal passion project. How can I help you? Who can I introduce you to? And so all of these are relationships over time. There's no way I could have planned that the years before. It was literally just trying to work with people who I wanted to learn and grow from, people who had the same level of taste that I did. And then as I was going along the way of figuring out, okay, what do I want to do? And I directed 2 short films. And then I was like, oh, okay, I really like that. I want to do a feature. And it's just constantly being open to the road curving, but kind of seeing kind of where you want to be, but it takes time. It's not overnight.
Yeah, and I think, it's an important thing that you've mentioned, and it's something that I constantly tell, whether it's film students or people that I meet, the networking aspect. Well, it's not just handing out a business card. There are people that I've met over the years that I've become friends with and then didn't work on a project till 10 years later.
Right.
And then you come together, and next thing you know, you do 3 films in a row. 2 dolphin movies and a dog movie.
Exactly. I haven't done Dolphin yet. We gotta join forces. I'd love to do a Dolphin movie.
So, but I think, and I think part of that is speaking to what does the marketplace want? There are, of course, films that you want to make. There's everything, projects that you want to make for yourself. But what does the market want? If the market wants dolphin films and dog movies and horse movies or whatever, then you make them because you need those stepping stones to keep moving. And so, Melissa, why don't you talk a little bit about, and Elayne, how do you find projects? Like, projects come to you sometimes. You're also looking for projects. Like, how do you get attached to a particular project as a producer to then, move forward and kind of help make it happen?
I do want to say one thing. The first film that I line produced was Lenny the Wonder Dog. So it was about a talking dog movie. So
Never go wrong with
yeah,
cute
and there
kid
was
films.
Showtime bought it. Who figured, but, you know, it takes a really, really long time to figure out, I believe, what kind of films you really want to make. I personally like movies that deal with the human condition, that deal with how strong we really are as human beings and what we can live through and thrive and achieve and keep going. Nonetheless, I'll still make Lenny the Wonder Dog. It's not something, it's when you are a writer, director, producer, you have that ability to pick and choose the type of movies you want to do, which is one of the things that, is wonderful about being the creative on it. I know for me, it's pretty much if they're funded, and I like the script, no, but it is what Tony and both Liz had said. It is networking. On every film, no matter how big, no matter how small, it's kind of like you're in the war together. You're all there together, and there are people that I've worked with for 20 films, and we've never socialized, but they're dear friends. You just, as the years go by, you watch their kids getting born, you watch their projects, they watch your projects, and it really becomes part of a community. I call it our film family, and it's a family that's ever widening, and every show I do, my film family grows. I also like to be loyal to the people who are good and grow with you and watch them excel and watch them grow into what they really want to do. Because it is a lot about self-discovery and really knowing, some people are great at comedy. Other people are great at horror. I'd love to do a horror film. Never did one. I still would love to. It's fun. But at the same time, you reach a point where you want to do films that are at least somewhat funded because you spend... I've been there where you could spend a year trying to raise money for a film that never happens, and there's a year of your life, So it really is. You have to balance it out. You have to assess as you're going as to what's worth it, what's worth your time and effort. I get a lot of people, a lot of students sending me emails trying to hire me as an executive producer. And meaning they want me to hire me to go raise money for their film. And, it's not as simple as that. Before you go out and start really raising money for a film, it's usually something you really believe in and really want to attach your name to. It's not just for, any type of project. And I think the freedom we have in the creative arts is to do that self-exploration and to grow within time and to evolve and watch, other people around you evolve and see how they're doing it, and all of a sudden somebody you started out with is going to the Oscars, and it's just wonderful, and it's something you don't find that kind of camaraderie in a lot of other businesses. But I do believe the key to success and a successful film and one that's pleasant to work on has to do with having that camaraderie, having that, you have their back, they have your backs, we work together, no matter what your role is, but it really is up to the creatives who write that script, who can take that script and that vision and turn it into, a living, breathing document. We were talking today about how screenplays are not intellectual properties as books are and other things. They're just not considered. And I was shocked to find that out. I was like, why not? But because you're not publishing, it's still an idea. And it's something that will continue to evolve. No matter, every time they have a different producer attached, it evolves in a different way. Everybody has something to bring to each project. So, your turn.
I'd say as far as finding work for myself, there hasn't been a film that I've done where I haven't worked with at least one of the producers prior. It's usually, you're working with someone that you know, and then there's that new person coming in, then that new person moves on to their own film and they need a production manager, a production supervisor, and then that's when I get a call. And every time it's, there's never been just a cold call of someone being like, hey, I need a production manager, found your name randomly. It's always been a contact of someone. Some of the producers I've worked for, I was their assistant, as a PA on one, and then I'm working with them closely as their production manager. And it's that trust that you have with them, because they know that I won't sleep until I get the job done. Not just gonna, leave something hanging or, get to it the next day. And that's what's super important, because we're moving, especially with the independent level, under the 5 million mark, you're moving at such an incredible pace, and you need those people around you who you can trust with anything, when they say that they're going to get it done, because there's not time to micromanage and, tell them to pull out your checklist. Let's see, what have you gotten done today? You're just assuming that all those people that you've hired, they've got it, and in that way, nothing falls through the cracks.
And so, we talk a lot about finding money for projects, and this happens to me a lot, and I'm sure it happens to you all a lot as well. The networking aspect, you just meet people at events like this and other things, and people just come up to you sort of cold emails or calls and say, hey, I need money for my project, will you help me do it? And you don't know the person, you've never met them before. How do you approach conversations like that, when people reach out to you, whether you've never met them before or you barely know them, or maybe you know who they are, and they're like, will you help me find money for my film? Because it's a question that everybody asks, and it's always on everybody's mind. And so how do you approach that, and what kind of advice do you give them then, as you let them down softly, and kind of when that happens?
Well, it's interesting because, oh God, this is so there's so much to unpack here. Because the thing is, it's like, if someone, I'm always kind and respectful and nice. But if someone's coming to me just like, hey, I need money, will you help me get money? I literally in my head would be thinking, why would I want to? Like, it just seems so 100% transactional and 100% one way. And as a producer, as a creative producer, you are a partner. You are a strategic creative partner to a writer-director, or to a director, or to a writer, And so to me, it's like, I do get a slight, like in my head, I don't act that way, but it's like, it's almost offensive that somebody is gonna want me to work for years of my life for them, and it's not, to me, it's like when people come to me, it's like, I have this amazing film. This is what it's about. I'm looking for someone to help me with this. That's a hugely different way of approaching. And I've been vocal about this because, again, in like the smaller budget, lower, like independent space, typically it's people coming together, fellow filmmakers. You meet at the Texas Theater, you meet at a Dallas Film Commission event, you meet at the Oak Cliff Film Festival, the Dallas International Film Festival, various ways from, and therefore, pardon me? Sunscreen Film Festival, exactly. I was thinking Texas, because we're here, but yes. And so then it's like you meet other fellow, let's say, and again, when you're emerging and starting out, you usually wear a lot of hats. So there's overlap in writing and directing and producing and whatever. So you want to help each other make films together. Okay, so then now you're going to that next level where you're like, okay, I've made maybe a couple shorts or whatever. Now I'm trying to elevate. So then what you've got to think about is you are trying to look for someone for a reason, that they made films that you responded to, that they would be the type of person you would want to work with. And then when you reach out to them, it's that. Yes, you may need money, but it's going to go a lot farther when it's like you've got the same taste level, whether it's making a horror movie to make money or making a socially relevant movie because you want to open people's eyes, to making an art house piece because you want people to see what talent you have, again, in this thing of whether it's writing, directing, producing, and so forth. And so to me, it's like, I'm just really mindful of who I work with, how people approach me, and the communication and the framing is so important. Because like you were saying, you're talking about potentially working for a year or two without making any money. And then, so you have to really believe in the person, in the relationship, and in the film. And every film has there's a different reason for making a film. It can be about money, making money. It can, like I said, there's are various things. So you want to make sure you align. And so to me, it's like, do your research. Oh, this person made the films that I really love, and they look like this is that type of film. Look for a producer that had a short film at a good festival who now would want to elevate to making a feature film and want to hustle and pay their dues, so to speak. Again, you're not going to get the top producer working, making your smaller film unless, there's a real reason behind it. And do you have a bunch of short films that did really well or are beautiful or impactful that will help you do that? Did you make a horror film that did pretty well for that budget and that size and you now want to elevate? Think about things. It's not transactional. It's not like, hey, make my movie for me or, raise my money. That's just not kind of how it works. And then what I would say, and I'm very vocal about this because I am an independent producer, is that the career for an independent producer is very different than being like a Hollywood executive or development executive, although people think of them as the same way. And so what happens is Hollywood is always looking for the fresh face, the fresh voice. So then when a movie that's smaller does well, they seek out that writer, director, or that actor. But they don't really care about the producer. And in a lot of cases, producers aren't getting mentioned in articles or aren't necessarily given credit. So when you're an independent producer, you're believing in this relationship, in this person, and in the movie, and you're investing time and resources and everything. So when the movie comes out and it does well, you're not really getting that much credit. You didn't make that much money because your percentage, that your producer fee is a percentage of the budget. So if the budget isn't very much, you're not making very much. The indie producers are the first people to be like, okay, I'll give up this part of my money so we can get this made because I've already I'm already in it for a year or two. So when the movie comes out and does well, then the opportunities are for the actors, the writer, directors, and then they're like, okay, we'll make this, here we've got this project. And then the writer director will be like, oh, well, this is my producer. And it's a Disney film. And they're like, we have producers. We don't need your producer. So it's not the writer director's fault. It's kind of intrinsic to the industry. And I'm part of a group that have created a union. The PGA is the Producers Guild of America, but they're not a collective bargaining like Screen Actors Guild, the DGA, the WGA. And so we're trying to make a change because it's not sustainable as an indie producer. However, it's so important to independent film. And I truly believe that independent cinema is good for humanity. We need art. We need these things. And so, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I am also an actress, so I guess I can't be dramatic. And so I think it's important. And like one of the people that helped start this is Chris Moore, who produced Good Will Hunting, who produced the American Pie movies, who did the Project Greenlight. He grew up with Matt and Ben. And he's like, I'm really worried about independent film because I couldn't get those movies made. I couldn't make a career out of it today. I'm good, but so he's really trying to make changes. And this is kind of in line with what's happening with the strikes for the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild. I mean, those are the same issues: sustainability, getting paid a reasonable rate, being able to create a career and being treated with respect. And so my thing is, when you are a writer-director, be mindful when you're reaching out to producers. Look at them as a strategic partner. Look at it like a relationship. And if you can impress someone, like Elayne, this is a relationship that could last a lifetime and change your career. So treat it that way. And then when you have opportunities, take your producer with you. Try to fight for your producer. It's a lot easier than people think, because a director or writer-director does have power, and they can say, no, this is my producer, but also that producer knows you and they're going to fight for you. So having someone on your team, like you're saying, your film family, is so important. The last thing I'll say, because I know I've said a lot, But this was something that was told to me and I thought it was invaluable, especially when you're working with your friends or working at a lower level. Really communicate and communicate expectations. Of course, you always want to get contracts. You always want to have your contracts, whether you're a writer, director, producer. But when you're meeting potential producers for your project, if you're a writer, director, or if you are a producer here and this is your path, when you're meeting with people and you're like, okay, first thing is story. I love the story, or it fits my wheelhouse, or I think we can make money, or whatever your reason is. And then you're like, okay, I like this filmmaker, I like this person. Really communicate what the expectations are. And you can do this in a very informal deal memo, but have a conversation as I'm your producer, this is what I expect from you as the writer director. You're the writer director, this is what you expect from me as a producer. So you can clearly communicate these things, where you see the film going, being realistic about it. And then once you discuss it, put it in an email, put it in an informal deal memo. You can deal with contracts. But if you really start communicating and understanding expectations, I have found that will help immensely going forward. Because a lot of times you're like, I'm making this with my friend or an acquaintance friend or someone that was referred to me. And sometimes what you're thinking is in your head and it's not been communicated, or it's what you assumed, or it's based on a previous relationship, and vice versa. So really getting on the same page, I think, is really important and helpful. And that was like a unique thing that I never thought of as far as I think of a contract, but I'm not thinking of just like having the conversation, type it up. So now you're on the same page.
Go ahead.
I was going to piggyback off that a little bit, and in the sense of when you are, if you're reaching out to someone for money, I'm someone, I don't raise money. I just handle it. But I do know, I'll have some people just say to me like, yeah, I've got like a $5 million script. What does that mean? What is, do you have a budget for it? Well, no, I just feel like this is what I'd like to make it for. And, it's a full action movie with cars flipping, guns blazing, it's shot in space type of thing. And that's something, it's know your script. Reach out to a line producer or UPM and just be like, could you read this for me? What ballpark am I looking for? Have additional materials if you are going to be reaching out to like a producer like Liz. Like, here's my lookbook. Here are things that I like. Just really knowing it, and because again, you're selling it. You have to sell your movie to her for her to want to back it and fall into that passion of it. So it's having, how many days you want to shoot it. Of course, everyone wants 45, 60 days to shoot a film, nice page a day, 8 hours, you go home, but that's not realistic. And unfortunately, we're kind of getting into an era where, we're cranking them out. I know some people who are shooting features in 11 days, very small independents, but that's all that they can afford. And so it's just take that, know it, don't just send it out and be like, raise this money for me, because that would be ideal. I mean, might as well just say, hey, will you just cut me a check? I would love to do that, but that's, just could you front some money? There's a strike going on and I'm not working. But that's, I think, really important, is just knowing what you've got, what you need them for, and having any materials and resources. I love doing budgets and schedules, just for fun. It's
This is like anytime someone.
I know.
They're fun puzzles. I'm sure, there's plenty of, and that's how actually I started with budgeting and schedules. It was just, I would just do my own and start messing around with them and learning them and seeing what works and what doesn't, and listening to other, producers. And it's just, again, all that listening. But if you have those materials, that'll go a super long way as well.
Let's get some questions from the audience, because, okay. That didn't take long.
I don't expect a producer to go out and raise all the money and do all the work, but I'm not a line producer, so I don't know, how do I approach investors? What do I say to them? And then do I go to a line producer and get a budget done first?
So for everyone that couldn't hear, she says, she's not a line producer, and how does she start approaching investors and asking for money and not knowing what a budget could potentially be?
I'd like to speak to that because I do a lot of budgets and help people put together pitch decks and whatnot, the materials they'll need so that they can go raise it. And I have many young filmmakers come to me and hire me to just do a budget and to be able to sit down and talk about how many days you really need to shoot it. For me, the most important thing too, when I approach a project, is to make sure it's doable. Like Melissa said, if you want to do a $5 million movie, but you want to shoot for 50 days and you're going to shoot all over the world, it's just not realistic. So walking into it, you need to know what you can do. And that is by finding a line producer or a producer who is very savvy about money and how much, how many days you actually need to shoot a particular project.
Pay you to do a budget?
Yes.
Yes, you can just pay someone
You
literally
pay-
just to do a budget and nothing else if that's what you need to get started.
Yeah. Because once you do speak to an investor, you can throw out any dollar amount, but you have to have it backed up. So, for example, like Melissa and I, we partner together a lot on this. We do the schedule first. So you see how many days you actually need to shoot. And then you do a budget, whether it's union, non-union, what you could afford, what you can't, which state's the best incentive for you, and put all that together. And that becomes part of your pitch deck along with potential actors and other, the creatives. But you need to be able to justify that budget to your investor, because there are many people out there who are just putting together movies so they could personally make a lot of money. And, if you don't have what's called, day-to-days, knowing your actor breakdowns and how many days each person's going to work and how many days you're going to be at each individual location, all of that turns into money. And so I advise people to have that done before you start approaching investors. Because, you throw out any nine, I need 20 million, I need 1 million, but you have to be able to back it up with something concrete. Well, here's my script, here's my breakdown, this is how we came up with the budget, and this is how it's going to be spent. So you do have to hire
And
someone.
sometimes it works a little backwards on that too, because you could break a script down, but the one thing you don't know is you don't know what your actors are going to cost. Not knowing what the actors are going to cost and not knowing who the actors are will determine the budget a lot of times too, because Brad Pitt, you're going to be able to sell that movie for a lot more than Tony Armour acting in your film. I'm not worth much, so thank you. I'm realistic about my. I once wanted to be an actor as well, like three of us on this panel today. But anyway, the point is, you can get a realistic budget of what it costs to physically make it, but then it'll change depending on who that talent is, because you might get talent attached to a project that then when you start going to sell it, you're like, oh, we're not going to be able to sell as much as our budget is here, so we need to cut the budget because this cast is only going to bring this much money. That means we got to cut $1 million off the budget, and then that's where creative producers and line producers all work together to, okay, what can we do to the script? How do we change it without really changing what we're doing? So yes, you can get a budget, but at the same time, it could drastically change, a little bit later.
And one thing I would like to add is that, and again, I'm speaking from a place of like things that I kind of wish I knew before to some extent, because, I would love practical information. And so the thing is that that's also why being wise, if it is a first feature or you've only, like a short or whatever, is that like simplify as much as possible, because the less locations, the less characters, the more effectively you can do it and do it well. And so what I always encourage emerging filmmakers is be really bold, really hone in on your voice, make it unique and fresh and different, but simple. Because, again, when you're talking about raising money, a lot of times you create your budget and then you're like, okay, well then we'll see if we can get it. But a lot of times you might not be able to. And like you said, you start cutting stuff. But if you know that you're more of an emerging filmmaker, why go through all that? Just start smaller. And what's going to get the attention, if it's made well, if it has a unique voice, again, it doesn't matter the genre. Obviously, there's certain genres that are better commercially, so you can keep that in mind. But, yeah, exactly. Animal, dogs, horror, those things will definitely sell better. but you're going to be able to execute it at a better level if you're not dealing with a huge cast, tons of locations, those types of things. So always try to simplify as much as you can, and therefore it's going to make that whole process easier until you're at the right level. And sometimes we have ideas or things we're passionate about, and that would be better as a second feature or a third feature. Do the other one first. And have you already executed shorts really well? Because if you haven't, make sure you have something that you can show people. But you can do a short, or even like I've done shorts that are one-day shorts that were limited, that did really well. And even 7 days, one location, 2 actors. Part of it was during COVID, so it was safer. We filmed that in 8 days. So it's possible. It's just the talent, the passion, the thinking outside the box, and simplifying.
Great. All questions? Okay, up there.
As far as getting a pitch all put together, what are some of the things that you've seen that have made it really successful, other than what you've covered, versus like where are some of the gaps that you've seen where people like they neglected to take care of a couple of things and everything just fell apart, they couldn't fund?
As far as the pitch deck goes, like the look of the pitch deck, or just like the pitch in general, including the deck and the other items that would be
In general, like what makes it, what gets you a yes versus a no?
actors, number one. But let's say you don't have the actors attached to it, then what other things?
I would say definitely like both the reality, like the realism, like they were mentioning, like is, in your deck, you're talking about what the budget is, the actual story supports that. The idea of your plan after you make it is, do you have a plan of action, for the release of it and to get money back to investors? Like, does all that feel very realistic? And then because it's a visual medium, you want people to see the vision. So it has to look cinematic. It has to have something that stands out. There has to be something really special about the story. And then I would think the last component, aside from, like you're saying, talent, because if you have a name actor, like that changes everything, or name actors. But, if someone's believing in this with actual money or time or, their experience, then they have to believe in you or the filmmaker. And so the other thing is like, a lot of times people are like, what have you done? Or if I'm a producer, they've been like, what has the director done before? What can I see of theirs? So it's like, what have they done? Does the deck look cinematic? Can I see the movie? And then do you have all the pieces of the puzzle to show that they really understand the business? And again, it could be a group thing in terms of like your producer really has a good reputation. They know what they're doing. The writer director has the vision. Like it's a team thing, but those are the components to make it successful.
And I've said this in multiple other, these 6 workshops that we've done now. I'll repeat it again for anyone who may not have heard it before, is I'm a huge proponent of, if you're just starting out, doing your no budget feature film. Like if you only have $6,000, go make a feature film anyways. You can figure out. My first feature film I made was for $6,000. And we shot weekends only over the course of 4 months through 4 hurricanes in Florida, by the way. And we still got it done, and it was terrible when it was done, but it was a great experience. And then as soon as that was done, people started coming up to me and saying, well, you made a feature film, you helped me produce my feature film. Because you'd made a feature. You can look at IMDb and see 60 shorts on somebody's IMDb page, but you see that one feature film, that's what you go to, because they made a feature and they actually finished it. So, right, like you said, for whatever this great idea you have, that's your second movie. Make your first movie, takes place in one room in a theater with a bunch of people listening to a panel, and that's your feature film. And that's your
Well, and I was talking to Andrew earlier today about, so Mel Eslin, who I was telling you, that's president of Duplass, she's directed episodes of like Room 104, and like I said, she started off as an AD. And so she just directed her first feature. It premiered at TIFF last year. IFC picked it up. It just came out recently. And it's literally Mark Duplass and Sterling K. Brown and one location. So it's a very interesting story. Like it definitely goes in a direction that you're not expecting. But it just goes to show you that even people who have access to a lot of stuff and successful, this was her first feature to direct, and that's what she did. She did something very kind of bold and different voice, but simplified.
Anyone else? We got more questions. I know we do. There we go, way in the back.
So for compared to a creative producer to a line producer, what is the differences of you all's relationship with, like you mentioned, the creatives who are above the line compared to a creative producer? If that makes any sense.
So what is, say, like Elayne or Melissa do as line producers versus, like, what's their relationship with, say, writer, director, or talent, as opposed to, because they're not writing the script. But Melissa, you were telling the story earlier about how you should have gotten a writing credit on a particular project. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, like what actually can happen when you're a line producer, but you have to get involved in the creative aspect as well.
Yeah, I try not to write. Too often it's not my skill set, but it was one of those moments where our writer she had some personal stuff going on. She wasn't able to make tweaks, and we had to tweak the script to fit our locations. We had a 15-day shoot, and our locations were already solidified, so we had to, move it along. And so we went through and just the lead producer and we just sat in a room and tweaked the script to make it fit and flow to how we needed. And as far as, that was kind of just a special circumstance, but I didn't get my WGA credit, so that's like, well, I was a little bit hurt. But as far as like our relationships with the creative, we have to be both, what I was saying earlier, the best friend and the enemy, and there's nothing, I would love to be able to be like, yes, this is great. But unfortunately, that's just not the way it is. So our job, like Elayne and I's job, is to go to usually the creative producer first, tell them what issues we're having as far as the budget constraints to the creative constraints, try to figure out plans and options, and then bring them to the director and let them know what we're dealing with and, what we feel that we can do. They might love it. They might, it could work better and they didn't see it that way, or they could absolutely hate it. And we might have to be able to give them that. We might have to tweak and, take away something else. Or it's really, for us, it's playing with numbers, as far as our side of it. And, yeah, that's pretty much, yeah. And I don't, for me, I personally don't deal with actors too much, mostly just making sure that they're comfortable and they're happy as far as, that my team, my AD team is doing what they need as far as getting them to set, that they're, they're not getting incorrect sides or things like, that's more my side versus if there's something with the script or director that they don't like, usually that would be something like Liz's area to kind of work with them on that.
The only thing I would like to add to that too is the best possible scenario is when you have a collaboration between the creative producers and the line producers and the director and the writer. I know for many films I do script notes, and when I turn in my notes to the group, it's very often has to do with the financial side of it. I'm not there to give notes about, the look of the house, but I can give them, hey, if we do A, B, and C, we save money and we save locations and we can do this. So we work together. If your director is somebody who just stamps their feet into the ground and has to have, the sky's the limit, it might not be the best project for you unless you have a budget that the sky's the limit. Because if you don't work together, you won't be making the same film. And I've been on movies where we're making a different movie than the DP, than the director. Everybody has a different vision. And there's a lot of stress and a lot of tension, and it usually shows in the film.
And this might help with a little bit of clarity, but like we were saying before, that in smaller films, a lot of times you're kind of doing both. I will say, as you elevate, for me, it is so important to have a really good line producer on a film. It makes such a huge difference. And I look at the line producer and UPM as like the people I'm working closely with. Like, I'm trying to make sure that my director's vision gets up on the screen, but I'm working closely with my line producer, UPM, when I've had them. And then, and now I'm like, I'm not working with that one. And then the thing is too, is what you have to think about as well is that, you know, a good creative producer has an analytical or logistical brain. A good line producer who is dealing with, you know, budgets and schedules and logistical things has a good creative brain and loves movies and like you're saying, can think creatively to apply. Because all that we're doing, whether you're a creative producer or a line producer, is problem solving, is coming with solutions to things. And what you're thinking about is what is in the best interest for the film? Because the film turns out well, then everyone wins. And so it's this balance of what can we afford, what is too much, too difficult, what is going to give us the most, you know, for the vision, let's say. And then the other thing to think about is, like I said, I as a creative producer come on board at various stages of development. Whereas, like, you know, she was saying, you know, is the film financed? Like if I would want to come and say, hey, I would love for you to be a line producer, here's the project. It's like, is the film financed? So the thing that's interesting is that line producers are so important, not that creative producers aren't. It's just a little bit more like, I don't know what the word is. It's not as tangible, right? So it's like you hire a line producer. This is what their rate is. This is what they're getting paid. There's no like negotiating that or whatever. Whereas a creative producer, I come on board a lot of times really early. I'm helping with this and that. It's a little bit more fluid. And so the thing is that it's so important to get a really good line producer. And when a line producer is really good at their job, they're gonna get hired and hired and hired. And so one of the things is, you know, if anyone's out here and you're trying to think about what trajectory path you want to take, if you are someone that likes that type of decision making, that is definitely a much more secure, even in this crazy film world that we live in, secure thing, because you need one and you have to pay them and they get paid for the time that they're there and then they finish the project and they can move on. Whereas the creative producing thing seems a little bit more like not as solid or specific or whatever. It's just, I'm really, you know, again, having that creative mindset, just really drawn to that kind of work, if that makes
You're
sense.
attached forever. In that way.
Yes, exactly.
Let's check this side of the room over here, right here.
Okay, cool. Elayne, I feel like you touched on this just a little bit when you were talking about when you were starting out and how you didn't really see yourself becoming a producer and then you did. I wanted to ask you guys, did any of you guys suffer from imposter syndrome or still do? What did that look like and how did you overcome it?
Do any of you suffer from imposter syndrome? And do you know what imposter syndrome is? See, Elayne doesn't even know that, so she definitely does not suffer from it. Doesn't even know the definition.
Well, I mean, I think, again, as a creative, you have that imposter syndrome at times. And definitely as I'm pivoting in my career from like producing to then like directing, and it's like, I have that. But what I will say that applies to all of it, but probably specifically to producing, is there is a solution or an answer to everything. So what is so important is knowing when you don't know something and going and getting the answer. The worst thing that you can do is act like and you may put on the brave face of like, oh yeah, I got that. And then you go to somebody and find the answer and think it through. And, you know, that's where as you go along, you usually have mentors. Or if they're not like a literal mentor, there's still people you've met along the way who are ahead of you that you can call and ask questions to. So to me, what's always helped me, because when I was stepping up and maybe not producing with other people, and I was either producing something by myself and it was my first film, of course I had those moments of like, do I really know what I'm doing? But again, it's always a phone call or question away. And, you know, on set, we're constantly solving problems where you have to be the voice of reason. You have to be calm and collected, like, okay, we're going to handle this. And then you figure it out. But even in things of dealing with unions or dealing with investors or dealing with things, there are always times where I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't done this before. I don't know. But just going, okay, that's okay. I can find out. And, you know, there is an element of like not being like freaking out, being like, I don't know the answer to that. It's like, okay, let me look into that, or give me a moment, or, you know, whatever. But just don't fuddle through and act like you know something and then don't really deal with it or whatever. So I think what's helped me the times that I've had the fear or the imposter syndrome is just knowing if I don't know something, I can find out. I'm an intelligent person. I can problem solve. That's really what it is. And communicate.
No, I would say I deal with it pretty often. Not lately in the last couple of years, but I'm young and I'm a female in this industry. And I'm often dealing with, I have some department heads who at times can be twice my age. And, I'm only like 5'4", so they're literally looking down at me in certain ways. But it is, it's just, the more I do it and the more, I keep getting rehired, and it's, I've really found my confidence in it in the last couple of years, but definitely when my first UPM and production supervisor jobs, absolutely. Even though I knew what I was doing and I did it well, but I felt like when I walked into a room, I think people thought I was still the PA. I very often, and I still get, "You're the UPM." I'm just like, "Yep." But it is, but it's staying confident in what you know and just really standing your ground in that.
The one thing I do want to add to it is to not be an imposter. To realize that syndrome is something that you're dealing with internally. But I really believe in being as honest as you can be so that you're not being an imposter. You're not overselling yourself. You're not saying I can do something, did it 100 times. Be as honest as you can be about who you are, what you are, and what you could bring to the table. And then people are willing to teach you. I think it's really important, even at my stage, I've been doing it a long time, but I have to stay teachable because there's new mediums every day. There are new people I meet, new projects, and I'm going to learn something every day, which is wonderful. But the most important, is you don't have to pretend to be something you're not, because you'll never be secure in that. Most people who are successful are usually people who appreciate the communication from somebody who's trying to help them and work with them. And they say, I've never done this before. How would you start?
Great.
Curious about the union fight. How many members do you have? What geography does it look like? I'm just kind of curious to hear more about where you are in the union fight. And then a second question about intellectual property. Do you see a need for legal experts around that when it comes to, getting protection for your film? Is that a need in the industry? Would that be a beneficial skill to offer it? So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
So his question, the first part of the question, dealt with the independent producers union. How difficult is that? I know it's really hard. So almost impossible.
I know.
And then the second part of the question was, what was the second part of the question? Intellectual property and screenplays. What can you do to protect yourself? Well, that part's super easy. Copyright.gov, $65, and you copyright your script. So you don't need an attorney to even do that. You can do that yourself, but you do need attorneys for your legal documents and chain of title and all the stuff as you move forward. But Liz, go ahead with the union.
Yeah, well, and you kind of answered both because it's been tough because what you have to do is we have to get signatories, and there's a lot of studios, bigger companies that are not necessarily interested in doing this, because they don't want to have requirements of minimums and so forth. But I think what's great is we've been starting the conversation. So even just in this fight, so to speak, or we're now opening up this conversation, which a lot of people weren't even thinking of or aware of. And even when I've had conversations with my directors, they were like, God, I've never even thought of it this way. I didn't even think about that. And, when we start communicating about, hey, this is how we should be treated, or minimums and so forth, then if a lot of independent producers stick together and start kind of banding together, whether or not you have that collective bargaining agreement, although we have an actual union and we're going forward with that, and that's the goal, at least it's making changes in the industry. So yeah, it's an uphill thing, but part of it is just getting it out there, educating, and when people understand, they're like, oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah, just things like this where people just don't know what producers do in general.
Yes.
They know why there should be a union to protect independent producers and, you know.
Well, and we're also, so what we've done too is we are having a petition to take off the P of the AMPTP, because that says producers in there. And so many people think producers are the people that make all this money, that are, and it's like, no, those are called Hollywood executives. Like, that's not producers, especially in the smaller space. And so it's like people are thinking that it's the producers that are against the writers and the actors. And it's like, no, you know?
Yeah, it's actually a very small collective of studios. Lionsgate's not even a part of the AMPTP. You know, you think of them as a studio, which they are, but they are not a part of all of that negotiating with everything that's happening right now. That's a whole other tangent. So, right here.
Have you ever gone through the process or maybe this experience where somebody presents you a short to make into a feature?
Has anyone ever presented a proof of concept short for a feature to any of the producers on the panel? Yes.
Are you talking about presenting the short as a proof of concept to make the short with the filmmaker, or hey, this is the short, I intended it to be, my intention after the short was to be the feature? Like, are you talking about like,
In order to make it into a
but the short is already done?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, all the time. And that's great. That's a great tool, because then what you're doing is when you're reaching out to producers, you're saying, here's the project that I have. Here's the script for the thing that I want to do. Here's the short that I did. And so this kind of shows you a little bit about like my style, the tone of the feature, my intention, my abilities. And then that can start a really good conversation, you know, taking, you know, it has to be on like the page with what the story is of the feature, but that helps in terms of the communication, you know, to that you're on the same page going forward.
And it's super common right now, especially great for film festivals. Like if you have a short that plays well at film festivals and you go to those festivals and you meet people that say, hey, I want to make this into a feature. This is how it started as a short. That's where a lot of shorts get turned into feature films, is building those relationships by taking those shorts to festivals and meeting people who see that and be like, wow, that was really great.
Yeah.
Well, what else are you doing with it? And then, you know, you kind of try to progress from there.
Hi. So we talked a little bit about the narrative fiction, but what about for documentary? Does it translate to that?
That's a great question. He's asking about documentary producing as opposed to narrative. Have any of you guys done docs?
I'm working on my first one now, but it was also something that she has already filmed. So she already had the footage. And then when she showed it to me, it was incredible, but it's not a story. It's not, you know, and so that's where I'm doing stuff like, you know, we were getting an editor. I'm raising funds to do the editing, to get a composer, to get it finished. Typically a producer that comes on board earlier with the documentary, I haven't done that yet. I'm sure it's the same kind of process as, you know, believing in the filmmaker, believing in the subject matter. The difference is you don't have like a script. You're kind of finding the story as you're filming and then in editing. But it's a similar thing of like a creative partnership, working together with the same vision, and the producer helping get pieces of the puzzle together, and you having your production part and then your post-production, and then figuring out the future for like festivals, sales, and so forth.
Yeah,
It just might be a longer process.
I make feature docs, and so docs. Well, we should probably do a documentary workshop.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, totally.
Thank you for that. I'll try and do. Basically what Liz said. It is very similar process, and you do want to bring your producer on early with whatever documentary that you're making, because a documentary, whatever story you think you're telling at the beginning, oftentimes ends up being completely different as you go through it, because the story changes, because it's, you know, real life in quotes is or isn't sometimes, depending on what that is. It's a longer conversation about making documentaries. We'll do a documentary workshop just for you to make sure that we have a little more in depth for you. How's that?
Oh, wow.
We'll work our way around the world. We're getting there. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, first of all, Elayne, I love your story about being in the right time, right place situation with your career and your journey. I wanted to ask about, as someone who is not in the community yet, the film community, who doesn't have a lot of it to be able to reach out to a producer and have a short film or a feature film produced? Or would you recommend working, in smaller groups to have projects done first before reaching out? Or would it be okay to reach out without having any prior work?
Okay, so the question is, she hasn't done anything in the industry, didn't go to film school, is really just getting started out. How do you get started? Like, how do you figure out, bringing a producer on board to help you do short films, finding people to work on short films with? How do you just even get started is the big part of your question, basically meeting the people that you need to meet. Did I summarize that correctly? Okay.
It's something I touched on earlier. For me, I find some wonderful people and that I take with me. They become part of my film family who start out as interns. I really do believe in interning, even if you did go to film school, because very rarely in film school you really get to see how a real set runs. And as an intern, you can learn. You get to hear how decisions are made. And that's just my personal take on it, is to start out without knowing your medium and yet want to start out as a director writer. It's kind of only half the job. First get to know your medium, be on a couple of film sets, volunteer, serve coffee, get ice, whatever it takes to keep working, to get to know these people, and then follow through. And keep calling, be a pain in the butt, but keep calling, persevere. And, because I know for myself, there are people who had called me for, a year or so. And then all of a sudden, wow, I need a PA. And they're calling me, and, or the name becomes familiar to you. It's no longer a stranger. And it's to really persevere and get out there. But I do think it's a mistake many people make from film school, is they get out of film school and they want to be a director or a writer or a producer and start at the top, and they don't really know their medium yet.
And I would add a little bit to that, is come to things like this, which step one, right? So you're going to meet people here and go to as many film festivals as possible. There are a ton of film festivals in Dallas. Oak Cliff Film Festival takes place right here at this theater. Dallas International Film Festival, which Beth, sitting right behind you. And so a great thing to do is volunteering at those film festivals to then meet the people, and then you're getting involved in the community and just start making short films anyways. You're like, I don't know how to make a short film. Well, you got a phone, right?
Right.
You got a camera.
Yep.
Just go and start making stuff. There are a bazillion YouTube videos on how to make shorts, and you just do it, right? And then once you started making them, you kind of progress through it. And actually, Asian Film Festival right here. So there's literally film festival people in this room that you can talk to and meet. And then Ashton and Barack, who run this theater, do the Oak Cliff Film Festival. So don't be afraid to get involved with the film festivals either. In the back, you really want to ask a question.
Okay, so you talked about budget analysis, right? So when you're first starting off with a film or what have you, who do you go to for a proper budget analysis of the script and how much you think it would cost so that you can put that into the script?
So you're talking about finding a line producer. How do you find a line producer, basically?
Yeah.
Finding a line producer or unit production manager. I'll let them talk a little bit about it, but one really easy resource is the Dallas Film Commission website. Has an entire database of all of the producers, line producers, crew members, anything you can need in the entire Dallas market is literally listed on the website. And you go in there, you can search that database and find those people and just start reaching out and saying, okay, here's line producers. You can send them an email and say, hey, I need to get a breakdown on my script and find out what this will cost to make. And there's 10, 20 people in there. You can reach out to all of them and see who wants to work with you, basically. That's one place to start.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Switch about short films. Is there much money in short films?
No.
Yeah.
Easy answer.
Yeah.
No.
It's not impossible to make some money, but you don't typically monetize short films. And there's more money in Europe than in the United States or internationally.
So how would one go about pitching a concept?
How do you go about pitching a short film to get made? So you have a short film idea that you want to make.
So I've already made 2 short films.
Okay.
How do I pitch it to be a feature or get picked up as a episodic
how do you take the next step from short films to features or episodic or anything like that?
And do you have the concept for the feature? That's like, you've got the short's the proof of concept, so do you have the feature written in? Okay, so you just want to definitely know exactly what you want to make, have your materials such as like a lookbook type of thing, and then kind of like what we were discussing before, really continue to meet people. So you're meeting other producers at like film festivals. I was like saying, look up other films that, like, again, being realistic and thinking about where your film falls. So look at films that have played film festivals that you responded to that seems in that level, and then look who produced them. And look at some of like the different producing labs at Sundance, Film Independent, the various programs. They might be looking for films as well. You can also look for other producers who have produced a handful of shorts, and the shorts did really well. They would probably love to produce a feature film, like their first feature. Yeah, like the shorts, they sell more in Europe than they do in the United States. But I mean, there are sales agents that rep and sell short films. It's just not, it's not a moneymaker thing.
No, it's not. And in Europe, government actually pays for
Yeah.
people to make short films and features. Like, it's a very different model than it is in the US. If you're a US short filmmaker, you're making business cards is what you're making. You're not making money. And that's really what a short film is. It's a business card, right? To show what you can do and how you can, show your talents essentially.
But if you want to use the short film as a pitch to make your feature, you do need to have a script. You need to be able to show them how the short film will be developed and why it needs to be developed. And that's really key. Because if you go and just say, yeah, we made a short, but I'm not quite sure, well, they're not going to be sure either. So you have to really know where and how you want it developed into a bigger medium.
Closer.
Oh, closer.
I know. When you talk with your hands.
Yeah. You could tell I'm not an actor.
This question is for Liz. Liz, you had a film about the coaching community, which is a very tight niche demographic. I wondered, what was your pitch to the business investors in that community? Was it it's an opportunity to invest and see something about your community being part of that? Or was it really like an investor? Here's an opportunity when we get through all of the expenses to make 10 to 15% on your principal. Or is it a combination of both?
It was a combination of both, but it was led with I wouldn't necessarily say the art, although it was a beautifully written script and concept, and we had like we didn't have an actual short film. It was more of like a proof of concept that we shot like some stuff for it. But it really had to do with the fact of portraying Iran in a positive way so that these Iranians who are part of the diaspora were wanting to support a film like this. We did have our production legal came from more of startup companies and then had done some entertainment law. And so our model was showing the investors how this film could be successful, and these were the ways that would happen. So we had comps, other films that we had comparisons. We were talking about the plan going forward. It was primarily cast, and so forth. But we were leading with with this type of film. We're leading kind of with the heart that they were business investors, and they were all grouping together. And again, when I was talking specifically about the businessmen that I was pitching to, because we were pitching to other people too in the industry in Hollywood, but like the actual businessmen, they were all kind of combining together, each giving X amount, so that the risk was lower for each individual, but then we were getting a bigger amount. But it was a collective thing of feeling like they were contributing, to art, something positive, something that they thought was important to get out into the world was the leading thing. But then we still had to back it up with, the business side of it, if that makes sense.
Crowdfunding part of it at all?
No crowdfunding.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the back.
You've all kind of touched that sell really well? What are some other genres of indie films that do well? Horrors, rom-coms?
Not rom-coms, actually. Not in the independent space. Unless somebody else wants to say the opposite.
No, I would just say in general, and I do want to preface that the whole thing with like I kind of like saying with the dogs was that I wrote it because I like love those movies. So although it ends up being profitable and they do well, I was really coming from an organic place. I didn't sit down and go, okay, how can I make money? Although there's nothing wrong with doing that either. And I do still love working in the family kid space. But what I was going to say is just in indie film world, it's just important to know what your goal is. And I did one of the films, Jewels of Light and Dark, which was Dallas filmmaker, Daniel Lobbs. He had made some incredible short films, had won at South by. This was his first feature. And we were selected for, at the time it was called IFP, now it's called the Gotham in New York. We were selected for their narrative lab. And it's for films that were already shot and they help you in post and so forth. But they said something really interesting, and they were talking about really understanding what your goal is. Even if the goal is all of the above, really hone in on it. Are you trying to make money on this movie? Are you trying to show what your abilities are artistically so that people are like, oh, they're really talented? Are you trying to make change, like really have a message getting out there? So if the goal is literally trying to make money, then yes, there are certain genres that do better than others. Across the board in general, in independent film, it's very hard to raise money for dramas. It's hard to sell dramas right now. You need something else. So you need either thriller or sci-fi. Horror films do really well, but and you could even have dark comedy, like comedy with the dramatic. In general, a flat out broad comedy or in general, a flat out romantic comedy, you need name actors. People want to see, they want to recognize the actors. So those do well if you have the level of talent. And then for instance, with Never Going Back, that was a comedy, but it was very specific and it took the genre and kind of turned it upside down because it was in the vein of a raunchier kind of teen stoner comedy, but from a female perspective. And you don't really see that very often. And then we got emerging actresses that were successful on TV. We had Kyle Mooney from Saturday Night Live. So it had this vibe of being kind of cool and hip and there was a vibe to it. So again, you kind of have to have a specific framing or approach in certain genres. And then yes, your standard horror, thriller, sci-fi.
Yeah, Christmas. I was gonna say.
Christmas, yeah.
You can make a Christmas movie and never go wrong, basically. But
Yeah.
if have you ever been to the American film market in Santa Monica? Highly recommend, from a perspective, from a straight business perspective of what sells. That is a market where it is literally just a sales market where they're just churning out widgets and selling them. And you'll go through there and you'll see, here are all these different hotel rooms, and they empty the hotel rooms and they become offices, and then everybody just has these posters outside the doors of what they're selling. And you can walk through and say, okay, these are horror films, and these are $100,000 or less horror films. And then this one company, they're only selling family-friendly kids films with animals. And then this other one has trashy action films, and then this one has, and each one has to be made at a certain budget level. Those horror films, churn them out $100,000 or less, you can make your money back, you can make some, and then you'll be able to make that next one, make it a little bit bigger. Those action films, those are $2 million and under action films with Casper Van Dien and Dean Cain and that B-level actor in them that has a particular name that then you can make the film, what the sales are going to turn out to be. So if you're looking at it from a straight business sales perspective, what can you make to get something sold and distributed, you have to look at what is getting made and sold and distributed and what those budgets are, and then tailor a project to that.
So that was the American film market?
American Film Market, Santa Monica, October 31st to November 5th.
And what I would just add to that is, try to do what you really feel passionate about. I know people who love action movies, so they want to make action movies. It's not solely because that would do well. You could really love Christmas and Christmas movies, so make that try to come from a place of, a pure place. And then also, if you do start smaller, you can look at it as art and building a craft and honing your voice and then getting success that way. There's no rules, there's no right or wrong. Listen to yourself. But again, I came up from like not necessarily thinking about, we were cognizant of getting investors' money back, but we were trying to make stuff that would show talent so that you could do the bigger thing next. And we're mindful of making things smaller because we were more like the thinking about it from an approach of being artists, And again, that's where you kind of have different lanes. No, think about what is important to you and what your lane is and what your goals are and where you want to go. Because there's nothing wrong. You always want to be cognizant of people's money if they're putting their money and their time into your film, but you also want to make sure that you are making something that you really believe in.
And we're pushing 9 o'clock, so we're going to do just a couple more questions here. So we'll go way in the back, and then we'll come up here, and there's a lot more. We'll see how quickly we can get to this. How about that? We'll start way in the back.
Yeah. So, as a producer, when you pick up a script or a story, can you tell if this is going to be a success in terms of the return on investment for the investor? And how do you pitch that to the investor in such a way that they're going to be able to kind of put money in there and make their money back? So how do you go about it as a producer in giving them specific numbers?
I would say to that, one of the things that really in today's market is the biggest part of guaranteeing or hoping to have success is going to be your attachments. It's going to be the actors involved. They don't have to all be top A-listers, but they have to have the background, the traction to make it worth it. Because when you go through a sales agency, they're going to take into consideration not just the genre, the writer, the experience. They're going to take who is starring in the movie. Who are the people attached to it? Because that's what audiences want now. There's a time you can go out and sell a project based on its own merit. And you can do that with a very low budget movie. But once you start getting into wanting a bigger budget movie, it comes down to the talent you have attached to it. And very often that's, again, it goes to the networking. You meet somebody at a festival whose brother happens to be best friend with Brad Pitt's daughter or whatever. And you look for those connections. And if it's a project you're really passionate about, very often that's kind of rubs off. So if you're really excited about it and you found a couple of actors who are really excited about it, your chances of success are greater. But there are never any guarantees. It's still a high-risk investment, no matter what level of filmmaking you're making. And it's just the reality of our business.
And it's hard because the script might be great, but the script is just the script. There's so many other things that have to go to make it successful. And everybody talks about the package. So what's the package? Who are the actors that are in it? Where are you getting your tax credit from? Who is producing it? Who is directing it? Who is your sales company that's selling it? Like, it is all of those things together that's going to make a project successful. And even then, it may not be successful, right? But you can limit risk and actually still make money back for the investor to make that next project. If you weren't at the first workshop that we did, which went into 90 minutes of all of this with a whole PowerPoint presentation, it is on the Dallas Film Commission YouTube channel. And you could actually rewatch that or watch that. It really breaks down, we really break down the finance, distribution, packaging, getting sales agents, all of that information. Have to do some pay.
Just because I'm curious about the snake in the washing machine story, what's the wildest request, story, or task you had to complete in order to get the movie made or show?
Wildest request or craziest thing that had to happen while you were making something to just keep going, or just something like that?
You've had like hold planes and stuff.
Yeah. I've done things where blowing up trains, blew up a freighter in the middle of the ocean. things that I would never in my wildest dreams would believe we can do and do it well. You know, I'd have to say almost every movie has something. You know, whether it's large or small, there's going to be something that hits you between the eyes, and it's like, oh God, how do I do this? You know, and it's a challenge. That's what keeps us going. You know, everybody who's done any movies has little stories to tell, and you know, pulling that impossible thing in the middle of the night, finding that resource that you didn't know you had, getting out there and just really pounding the pavement sometimes looking for something. But I'd say almost every movie has at least one thing, if not several, that would fall into that category.
All right, right there.
This is more geared towards somebody who's still trying to learn and grow. I've produced very small projects before, but still feel like I'm at the very beginning of my producing career. But I'm sort of in the, wearing multiple hats and learning how every department works together, and it's been wonderful. What sorts of skills or education would a producer need to focus on, especially right now, where work is a little bit slower, so it is hard to find that PA work. It's hard to find, any kind of work right now. It's really, really slim pickings out there. So, is there anything that producers, or even just filmmakers in general, that skills that they should be focusing on right now while there's a lot of downtime and having to sort of look for other jobs outside of film sometimes, that I want to continue to grow, want to continue to develop the skills and stay warm whenever work starts to pick up again?
Well, my answer is not going to answer it exactly because I'm not sure what in this kind of downtime you would do in terms of learning and growing in terms of in making money, like something that's paid. But what I will say that this is now a time, if this is something that you want to do, to be meeting with filmmakers and writer directors and reading and really watching movies, and finding what your voice is as a producer too, because people look at what films you made and identify you as that. And then now there's also downtime in terms of now is a time to get information. So for instance, and again, this is more specific as far as like if you have a couple projects on your plate, but you can start asking like talent agents, you can ask production companies like, who are the actors that you are interested in working with? If I had such and such budget level of a film, what actors would be people who would warrant this type of budget? You can start what I call like intel. You can start, getting information. If you have a couple projects on your plate, again, depending on what size they're at or whatever, I always talk about how getting community support is how you get independent films made well. And so now is the time to think outside the box with some of your potential projects of who could be organizations or, potential name EPs that might want to come on board to support your film because of the subject matter. Like now is the time to be honing your voice, watching films, meeting filmmakers, reading scripts, and then talking to people and getting information. 100%.
All right, we're gonna do so many hands. Okay, one last question. I almost feel like
Oh, God.
blind selection. Liz, you pick.
Oh my God, no, I can't do that. But I don't. But I will say that I don't know when we're getting kicked out of the Texas Theater.
Well, we've been here 2 hours, so we should probably.
Because I was gonna say, like, I would be willing to answer a few questions, like, as
Yeah,
we're leaving,
so
and like,
we'll
I'll be
We'll
around.
do last two official question. One official question right here, one together question, and then people can answer questions after.
We formed a diamond because we're a team. It's super easy. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure when I'm doing pitches, and right now we have a script. In terms of intellectual property and protecting ourselves, do we need to get potential investors or actors to sign an NDA, or can we just pitch freely?
And also, when we give the script to someone to read, do we need to do an NDA, or is it trust-based?
Do they need to do NDAs? I'll let Liz answer. I have an opinion on NDAs.
Yeah, I mean, again, without knowing the specifics of your project and your budget and your size and all that stuff, most likely smaller films are really personal or have some, unless if it's based off of something, then you're gonna have like did you write the script? You wrote it. Okay, so it's not based off something else, because you would need that stuff. I mean, I think in the smaller world, I don't think you need to really worry about it. Who's really going to make your film? It's when you've got big name actors and high concept films and stuff like that that you're trying to protect that. But what you're thinking is like, is someone really going to steal your idea and go make that movie before you do? It would have to be really like so grand, I guess. And
You can still copyright it.
Yeah.
Copyright it. So if you have a copyright.gov, then it's protected. And I never sign NDAs. If somebody sends me an NDA, I just say no. I know that I'm not going to read it.
And Final Draft makes it really easy to watermark
Yeah.
as well. So just a quick, personalized watermark, and I think that would suffice.
Yeah,
The only time I sign an NDA is if Lionsgate sends it over.
Right.
Which they did earlier this year, so
Then you do.
something like that. For the most part, I agree with Liz.
Yeah.
Hey, Bart, didn't you see it? What did you see?
He's been there the whole time.
All right, I have a last question.
Okay, Bart gets the last question.
One of the problems we have in the film world is everybody is trying creative things, and everybody thinks they're the greatest piece in the world.
Yes.
The world. How do you deal with egos that get out of line? Because as producers,
Well, then Liz,
Yeah.
Elayne answer that. She worked with Michael Mann.
That's one of the biggest challenges, I'd say, and most filmmakers know. And the bigger you film, the bigger your actors. But I've also come to find that there are a lot of very, A-list actors who are not egotistical as much as those who are coming on up. But I think it's important to not only treat people with respect, but also expect to be treated with respect back. And if their ego is in the way of treating people with respect, then that's my job as a line producer, is to call them on it and not allow that. There has to be a certain decorum. There has to be a certain way of behaving. And that's changed a lot. When I started out in the 80s, you could get away with anything, But now it's really, really important that people keep their egos in check. And if they don't, and it's getting in the way of other people doing their jobs or safety or any number of things, that's the line producer's job.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Round of applause. Yes.